My name is Brian Anderson. I'm with Eagle Technologies. I've also got, as I say quite a bit in webinars, a little help from Anthony Schweitzer. There you get the mute Anthony wave. That never happened before. Really, the star of the show is Scott Holowinski. Not only is he the Senior Vice President of Incident Response, but he's also the founder of Tetra Defense, which is, most of you probably know, is the company that Arctic Wolf acquired to bring out their incident response capabilities. Do you want to say hi, Scott, or wave?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Yep. And before I even get to the agenda, I'll just say I'm pretty excited about today because it's not too often you get someone on the horn that actually started an incident response company, that day-to-day deals with bad actors and security incidents. And so hopefully towards the end, we have plenty of time for Q&A. I have a personal question I want to ask him about bad actors myself, but the agenda is pretty simple. I'm going to start out with a little intro on Eagle, and then I've got 5 what I call security tales. And so these are incidents that have happened to our customer that kind of drive home the reason why we think you need to think about incident response in general and talk a little bit about the value of an incident response retainer. And then I'll hand it over to Scott. And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to start with an overview of the current threat landscape. We'll step back and talk a little bit about Arctic Wolf incident response, and then we'll get to that opportunity for some pretty good Q&A. So I am going to move a little quick on my slides because I really want to make sure that we have time for Scott. I'll just say right here that, we've been saying a lot at Eagle lately that, every solution you evaluate or choose, and even every setting you may change in an application, is an opportunity to improve or degrade your security posture, right? And as we talk a lot about at Eagle, that also means having something that we call recovery in depth. At a high level, it's the notion that you're probably going to end up with multiple backups when you have a good security posture. Some are going to guard that intellectual property. Some are going to be geared towards a quick restore. So that takes what we call design in depth. It's really a security first strategy on everything, making sure that you architect recoverability into each layer. And then, of course, all of that's for naught if you don't have something that's simple to maintain and consume. It's got to have quality support. And of course, business outcomes matter. It's the notion that we're not really doing you a favor if we build a Ferrari with a bunch of widgets you don't need, right? So that's kind of how Eagle does business. And before I get into those security tales, I did just want to briefly talk about what we're going to talk about today and how there's really kind of 2 similar but different things. So the first is incident response. That's the notion where you're hiring cybersecurity experts that specialize in detecting, containing, eradicating bad actors from your environment and providing a post-mortem or post-incident activity. We're also going to talk about incident response retainers. And really, that's the onboarding process. It's essentially the notion that you know who's going to answer when you pick up the bat phone. It gives you a guaranteed SLA, guaranteed hourly rates. We're going to talk all about that more later on. But hopefully some of the security tales I talk about will kind of drive home the reason why you really want to know who your incident response provider is before you have a breach or a cybersecurity event. So let's tell a couple of stories. Obviously, I would be a jerk if I put the company names in here, right? But I did put the verticals in because sometimes the context kind of helps you envision what's going on in the background. All 5 of these stories start the same way. There's a breach, there's a ransomware attack, quite a bit of the infrastructure is down. In this instance, the customer reached out to Eagle right away. We recommended an IR provider, and we arrived on site to assist with the recovery while they worked in parallel to contain that threat. Unfortunately, what happened is after about 4 hours, upper management ran into the data center and said, I finally called my cyber insurer. They're insisting we use a specific IR company on the West Coast, or you need to halt everything and get 3 quotes, right? So the takeaway here is the recovery was delayed by more than 3 days because the company did indeed want to work with someone that they chose. So we often tell customers it's really important to know the guardrails as it relates to cybersecurity. Don't be afraid to call up your cyber insurer and make sure you understand the process and who they will indeed work with. Story number 2.
Hey, Brian,
go ahead, Scott.
Can I add one thing to that last slide? So
sure.
If you have a retainer, the one thing I would add is you can work with your insurance broker even if the IR vendor that, let's say it's Arctic Wolf IR, if for some reason they weren't on that carrier's panel, you can work with your insurance broker to get them added on your policy. So that's something that you can always do proactively, is actually name, hey, if I have an incident, I want to use this particular firm. So just something to keep in mind. You can work with your broker to do that.
Yeah, and that is a great point because frequently, when we work with customers and for instance, they want Arctic Wolf incident response, that's part of the process, right? Is working through that. So that's a great point. So story number two, or security tale number two, it starts the same way. It was a little bit compounded by the fact that the guy that has all the knowledge in his head was out on vacation, but ultimately they reached out to Eagle. We recommend recovering from snapshots as the quickest way to get back online. But a story that repeats itself in a lot of different ways occurred with these guys. Their KeePass database that gave them the admin credentials for their SAN was actually stored on files '01, so it was now encrypted. There's actually a happy ending with this story if you haven't heard it before. Support kept telling us we were up S Creek without a paddle, without that password. We kept pushing back, and about 4 hours later, one of the founders of the company remoted into the array and gave us access to the array, right? The quote unquote back door. But this story doesn't always end that well. So a recurring theme of a couple of these lessons is think about single points of failure and, just recognize the notion that you may not have access to any of your IT infrastructure. And one thing Scott will probably talk about is the onboarding portal that Arctic Wolf has to really try to prevent some of this and to get all your ducks in a row. So this story always makes me sad, and it's happened with multiple customers. The customer starts with that everything is down scenario. They decide that it's going to take too long to recover from backups, and so they pay the ransom, and the hackers win. Typically, we hear about this a couple weeks later, and we politely remind them that they had thousands of snapshots on their array, right, that they could have potentially used to restore almost immediately. So the point I wanted to make here is that, when you're in one of these situations, you're under duress, you're sleep deprived, you may not be thinking clearly. Even if you haven't been through a cybersecurity breach, you may have had a data center outage, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. At Eagle, we're always here to help. Give us a call. Hopefully we know your infrastructure, right? We've designed that recovery in depth strategy, and we can help you decide on the quickest path to get back online. So another situation that we've seen multiple times is where the customer does or doesn't pay the ransom, right? But more importantly, they don't enlist the help of incident response and no postmortem is performed. So we've seen this play out a couple of different ways. We've had customers that actually get hit by the exact same agency 2 weeks later, and they extract another ransom from them. And of course, then they go on to figure out what happened and how they were able to get in. It's been things as simple as remote desktop port forwards, right? And sometimes it's more complicated. But one point I wanted to make, and I'm sure Scott will touch on this, that a lot of people think of incident response as, the big parts, the containment and the eradication, but understanding how they got in and the depth to the damage they could have done is equally important. And that's a nice segue to my last story. We had a large education customer that went through something similar. They reached out to Eagle. We helped them use a combination of snapshots and backups to restore quickly. They did not pay a ransom, but they also chose not to spend the extra money for incident response. And unfortunately, this ended a couple weeks later when one of our security guys at Eagle found a treasure trove of all their personal information, right? Personal information, identifying information on the dark web. Don't ask me how to get on the dark web. I'm sure Scott knows. But my takeaway here is you could argue that the postmortem wouldn't have prevented the data exfiltration, but it is really important to understand what you're up against in one of these situations and what the potential damage can be. So just another reason why enlisting incident response, even if you feel like you've got a really good recovery strategy, is key. So I won't read this whole slide, but just a couple of things. One thing I didn't talk about is incident response retainers. That's a yearly fee that it gives you that onboarding process. It does not cover the actual cost of incident response. And I would think one of the main reasons why is folks like Scott and his team, when they first get on the phone, they don't know if that's going to take 40 hours or 400 hours, right? So typically there's an upfront fee, there's agreed upon hourly rate, and the hourly rate pulls out of that bucket. But when it hits zero, you're still on the hook for the bill. So it's important to understand that. And I just wanted to reiterate that there's a lot of value in the whole process of incident response, but that post-incident, post-mortem is also really important. And then my last slide, Scott, before I hand it over to you, is I also want to just reiterate that we're here to help, right? We've been backup and recovery experts for 30 years now. Hopefully we helped architect the environment and we could just serve as a cool head. So if you run into one of these situations, we don't care if you're working with someone else on incident response. We'd love to just hop on the phone and have the opportunity to help. So please keep us in mind.
When our team responds to, an active incident, it is, we like to say, like on the worst day of that company's history oftentimes. And it is, there's a lot of different players involved in that response effort. And when you have a really, really solid IT solution provider involved, the response always goes that much more smoothly. So it is always our preference, our team's preference, to work closely with your other vendors to make sure that we're able to respond quickly and effectively. So knowing a lay of the land is really, really important. And those providers are just as important as our internal team to having a successful incident response. So, it is absolutely a collaboration there. So what I always like to start with, our team obviously is responding to kind of the worst of the worst when it comes to incidents. These aren't minor inconveniences. Usually the customers that our team is getting called in to help, their business is not operating. So if they're a manufacturer, the manufacturing plant is usually shut down. If they're a law firm, they don't have access to any of their files. So it's really critical that our team comes in and can get to work right away. But one thing we always do at the end of each quarter is kind of aggregate all the different data that we have from these cases, and we kind of roll it up into kind of a threat landscape report that we provide to our partners. It's really just all about kind of sharing of information, and hopefully some of that information can be used to kind of prevent these attacks in the first place. I always like to show this slide because I think it really highlights the fact that at the end of the day, these threat actors are opportunistic. They are not specifically targeting, in most cases, a particular vertical or a particular company size. What we're looking at on this map is, again, from our intel in the cases that we actually have responded to over the last 4 quarters. The size of the circle is the revenue size of the company. And then obviously the location is the location of the country. And what you can see is there are big circles and small circles, and they're all over the map. So again, threat actors, I like to say, are lazy. They are going to go for the lowest hanging fruit. That's been true for the last 10 years. It's true today. So, when we talk to victims, when we're helping organizations get back up and running, inevitably they ask, how could I have prevented this from happening? And it oftentimes comes back to really basic blocking and tackling. They simply made it too easy for these threat actors to get in. So just again, they're opportunistic. They're going to look for low-hanging fruit, and those are the victims that they're going to attack. So it really is, at the end of the day, avoidable. If you're doing the basics really, really well, you're investing in your security posture, putting the right systems in place, you can ensure you are not an easy target. And in most cases, that's going to make a threat actor move on and go somewhere else. The next thing,
kind of like those Hyundais and Kias that are just way too easy to break into right now. That's
right. I mean, these threat actors, the other thing I will add is they're sophisticated organizations. These are not, these are not individuals that are oftentimes perpetrating these attacks. They're actual fairly organized companies that operate with normal operating departments. I actually was joking with somebody this morning. As most folks know, Europe in August kind of shuts down. Everybody takes vacation. And the threat actors are no different. A lot of them operate out of kind of Eastern Europe. And we actually had this happen. Unfortunately, a customer, after looking at all of the different options, decided that in order to ensure the non-release of some of their data, they were going to pay the ransom. So they made that decision. And unfortunately, the threat actor group, the person who handles all the different keys, is on vacation for the next week. And they responded and said, we're really sorry. We will process your order, but you will not get your decryption keys for another week. And we will ensure that your data is not released when that person gets back from vacation. So again, they're sophisticated. They run these like normal operations. They have customer success departments and they have customer support departments. But anyway, just an interesting story. It was a very polite email and our team had to, it's serious business, but they had to chuckle a little bit.
That is really interesting. I'm trying not to pepper you with questions already because you're getting me going.
Feel free if you do want to jump in. I'm happy to answer them. But yeah, kind of moving along here. The next thing we always take a look at when we roll up kind of our threat intel is what industries are being impacted. And if you just kind of look at the stack rank here, there's no surprises. Healthcare, finance, insurance, legal, and kind of down. I don't think folks would be surprised at what they're seeing here. What is interesting, and the thing I do like to call out, is what you'll actually see is that although healthcare is the top bar up here, if you look at the percentage of attacks, it's actually decreased quite a bit. Healthcare, they've been a target for so long. They're investing heavily for the most part in better security controls, and we are seeing them become more difficult targets. We're seeing increases in areas like manufacturing, education, 1.6, it's now up to 3.3. So again, threat actors, back to my first slide, opportunistic, they're looking for easy targets. And as we see historical industries that have been targets for a long time start to do a better job of protecting themselves, we're seeing threat actors shift to new targets and new industries. The last really critical thing we always look at and keep close tabs on from a threat intel perspective is root point of compromise. And Brian touched on this. When we come in to respond to an incident, one of the biggest values that our service provides is our forensics teams will dig to truly identify what was the root point of compromise. And this is something that when organizations kind of do a DIY approach to incident response, maybe they have just their internal team take a look, they'll oftentimes find a point of compromise, but it's not the root point of compromise. And again, Brian mentioned, reinfection or threat actors regaining access. Oftentimes that's because whatever that initial point of access, whether it was an open vulnerability or a malware link that was clicked on an endpoint, it wasn't truly identified. That door was not truly closed. And as a result, the threat actors were able to get back in. So we always look to make sure we dig as much as we possibly can. And we're not perfect. So, it's not 100% that we can definitively determine, yes, this is the root point of compromise, but 90+% of the time we can. And it's just ultra critical. You can be very confident then that that door has been closed. So when we talk about root point of compromise, and in particular ransomware, which 70% of our cases are ransomware cases, it's the things we've heard about forever causing is, so the blue section here is external exposures. These are unpatched vulnerabilities. Again, I'm a broken record already, but lowest hanging fruit, opportunistic. These known vulnerabilities are wide open doors that the threat actors can walk through. And what we'll see is, for example, MOVEit vulnerability came out in June. We'll see a slew of attacks leveraging that particular vulnerability. And the threat actors will continue to hit that vulnerability until it gets harder, and then they'll move on to a new one. So it is very common that our team will get very efficient at responding to a very particular type of attack, because these threat actors kind of move. And again, they're lazy. They're going to just keep doing this over and over again until it becomes harder to do, and then they move on. So we continue to see quarter after quarter, an external unpatched vulnerability being a leading cause. So over the last really 3 or 4 quarters, 72% of the ransomware cases that we responded to, the root point of compromise was an external vulnerability. It's really frustrating for our team because, again, these are in most cases, completely avoidable if those patches had just been done. And then the last section is user action, and this is the more classic. Somebody clicks on a link, downloads a piece of malicious malware, and from there, the threat actor is able to get a foothold into the environment. So no surprises. If we look at this quarter over quarter, we might see these numbers fluctuate plus or minus 5, maybe even 10%. But it's been very consistent for quite some time now that the external vulnerabilities are continuing to be the primary root point of compromise in the ransomware cases we respond to.
Hey, Scott, if we'd have had a Kahoot style quiz, I would have thought user action would be at least 50%. Does it get back to them being lazy? I mean, do you have an idea why that's lower than I think even most people would expect?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it comes back to that. Like, these external vulnerabilities are just easy. It can be very automated, and they're early work on a ransomware case that's leveraging an external vulnerability can be programmatic. So they typically are just scanning for a specific vulnerability that they've created essentially a package or an attack for, and it can get launched automatically. They literally come in the morning and they go, okay, I've got a couple of hits and now I can get to work. So we've seen the threat actor groups go more and more towards these external vulnerabilities because it's just so efficient for them to take advantage of them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right, I won't spend too much time on this. It feels a little bit too marketing related to me, but Arctic Wolf Wholesale has always been known for this concept of security operations cloud, and it has everything to do with detection and alerting. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we identify an intrusion as soon as possible, alert customers, alert partners. We can stop the attack before it becomes a major problem. Where incident response, thing I'm passionate about, comes into play is when all of that stuff goes wrong. And no matter how good your tooling is, we just showed 25%-ish of the time a human is involved, and the best tooling in the world oftentimes can't prevent that. So we come in when all else fails, and we actually need to respond to again a major incident. And again, our team is not being called in when there's some minor disruption and there's a few things going wrong. Usually things have really expanded to a point where major components of the business, if not the business wholesale, is no longer able to function. Email server is down, website's not working. Again, manufacturing plant isn't running. So that's really where our team comes in. It's what we're best at. Our team is a team of superheroes who comes in to save the day. The team behind all of this, and I really have to highlight, there's really 2 ways we're engaged. We have what I would call reactive incident response, which is what I just described. We don't know the customer, never worked with them before. They're dealing with a horrible cyber incident. Our team gets called in, we get a lay of the land, We dive in, work with internal teams, external teams to restore them to a pre-incident state and get them back up and running. We also have more of what I would call a proactive IR solution, which is the retainer. And that's where we get to engage a customer in advance of an incident, help them prepare, plan. Hopefully they never need to use us, but at least we've established that relationship and the process in advance. So just to kind of set it up in your heads, we'll kind of talk about both of those things here over the next few slides. The team behind our incident response service offering, again, I started the company, it was called Tetra Defense around 2016. We started very heavily partnering with the cyber insurance ecosystem. So one thing that was really apparent back in 2016 is there was a lack of comprehensive incident response firms that could assist not only with the forensics, but all aspects of an incident response case. So started partnering with cyber insurance carriers who are backing most of the cyber insurance policies here in the United States. And we kind of mentioned this earlier, but they have these pre-approved panels of IR vendors that when their insured has an incident, they can go to that list of vendors. Pricing is already pre-approved. They know that we'll respond fairly quickly, and they know they're dealing with kind of a known quantity versus going out onto the internet and just picking a firm that comes up first on Google. So we're on 36 different insurance panels here in the United States officially. Quite honestly, our brand and our team's experience is big enough where even if for some reason we weren't officially on a panel, it is very unlikely that if we were engaged on an incident response case that a cyber insurance carrier would say, we'd rather move it over here. So it's a huge benefit to our, whether you're dealing with our retainer or kind of our reactive full-blown incident response work, knowing that you're working with a company that has an established relationship with your cyber insurance carrier is a huge value add. It means we know their claims handlers, we know their process, we know how they like to invoice. Again, rates, everything is ready to go. It just means our team can start faster. We can get on the phone with you and get started. And it's a huge advantage. The team size is 100 plus and growing. We have teams and folks now overseas, Australia, EMEA. A lot of them are focused here in the United States. I think we have team members in 36 different states just here in the US. And it's a team that spans from forensics, which we'll talk a little bit about, to more IT background. We have threat actor negotiators. So regardless of what your needs are on any particular incident response case, we have a team that is scaled up and ready to go. Beasley is one of our biggest insurance carriers, but just to kind of talk a little bit about the scale of the team, just for Beasley since 2019, we've responded to 400 of their insurance cases. We will respond to more than 1,000 cases just this year. So that is really valuable. It means when we get on a call with a customer, it is very rare that we haven't already dealt with the situation they're dealing with. Again, these threat actors kind of move around and they attack victims in swaths or groups. So like I said, when Move It came along, maybe the first one, there was a little bit of learning that had to happen, but within that first week after that vulnerability, that 0 day came out and was getting exploited, our team had already responded to probably 30 of these. So when we were getting on those scoping calls, we're able to kind of reduce the anxiety of the customer very quickly. We've dealt with this before. Here's likely how they got in. We can provide them a whole bunch of really valuable information right from the get-go. So the volume and the scale is really important versus, you know, maybe a smaller operation that might only see 1 or 2 cases a month. All right. So I touched on a little bit, you know, folks oftentimes ask me, well, what's involved in incident response? So I kind of like to break it down and kind of walk through the different components, and then I'll actually kind of walk through the basic timeline, what to expect if you have an incident. So what you see on the screen right now are the primary buckets of kind of specialists that we have on our team. The first one already discussed it at length, but digital forensics, these are the team members who are going to dig into the logs and really determine root point of compromise. So the who, the what, the when, the where, the how. They'll identify what ransomware group it was, what vulnerability they took advantage of, or what link was clicked on, maybe what the malicious malware was. It's a really, really important part of gaining comfort in the fact that we've identified how those threat actors got in, which is step one to making sure we've closed the door and making sure they can't get back in and they're out of the system. So digital forensics is a core part of what we do. What I would say is all of these different things you're seeing on the screen right now are really happening in parallel on any particular case. So we'll have our digital forensics team, doing the investigation. The next thing we'll do is the monitoring of all of their endpoints and servers while that investigation is happening. So if you already have an EDR deployed, we'll kind of take over management of that and all the monitoring. It's 24/7 monitoring during that incident lifecycle. So our team will be monitoring. And again, this is just making sure the threat actors no longer in the system. If they are, we'll be watching movement and we'll make sure that we eradicate them. So it's a really important part, even when customers have, their own teams who can do monitoring, or maybe they're outsourcing it to somebody. Our team will really kind of take over. Again, the experience matters to make sure that, we have eyes on their critical systems, throughout the course of our investigation. From there, this is where the collaboration with the IT partner really comes in. So restoration and recovery, we do have internal teams that can help, but oftentimes it's more of a quarterbacking arrangement. So if you have, Eagle in your back pocket and they're helping you with, all your backup systems and everything, we will coordinate with them on the whole recovery and restoration process. And, we can provide additional assets if necessary. But this, again, is more of a quarterback situation to make sure that, we're here, we've dealt with this before, and we can assist in that recovery and restoration process. And it's always interesting to me, depending on the type of organization, the forensics piece is really important. Obviously, that's how we make sure that the door is closed. But recovery and restoration is usually the early focus for most. It's like, hey, I just want to get my email working again and get my business back up and running. So again, talking of like process, these things are happening in parallel. We're not going to, wait to do the recovery and restoration work until after the investigation is done. We're going to be getting on both of these things right out of the gate. A really critical piece of ransomware cases is threat actor communications. And I always like to highlight that we always advise not paying a ransom. We've dealt with this long enough. Tactics have changed. In the early days of ransomware, it was all about encrypting data. We still see that commonly, but we're also now seeing the exfiltration or theft of data and then publicly sharing it. If you don't want them to share it, pay us a ransom. So we're kind of seeing this double ransoming happening now. So even though we're going to, in most cases, encourage folks to work with their existing backups, take the time, work with your IT solution provider to do those restorations from backups, don't pay the ransom. And even in the exfiltration scenario where they've claimed to have stolen data, we're still going to communicate with that threat actor. We're going to make them prove what data they have. We're going to ask them to share some files. Are they actually being honest with us, or are they lying? So we'll talk to the threat actors. If for no other reason, we want to verify their claims. But then if maybe it's a very sensitive organization, maybe they're a law firm, they simply cannot swallow the reputational harm of having client data released. We will then negotiate the absolute best outcome for our client. Oftentimes a threat actor will start with a ransom demand of $1 million. Our typical negotiating success is at least an 89% reduction from the initial ransomware request. The threat actor. So if they, request $1 million, we typically can talk them down to, 90 grand. Still a big number. If you have cyber insurance, most policies will cover that. But that threat actor communication and negotiation team is a really, really critical part of our operation. They have tons of experience doing this. They have all kinds of different tactics. And again, it's a huge value add to using an incident response service like Arctic Wolf. I won't cover the bottom three. Those are, just more types of incidents that we respond to. We've talked a lot about ransomware, but we still see a lot of business email compromise. And our team is obviously well suited to respond to those as well.
Hey, while you're changing slides, we had some questions that I thought maybe you can address here. By the way, great information, especially even the savings and how important it is to still communicate with the threat actor, even if you don't plan to pay the ransom. Yep. Things I don't think most people think about. I'm one that I don't like confrontation, so I'd just be like, I don't want to talk to you. Let me figure this out in the background. But
it's a fascinating part of our operation. It's actually where a lot of our threat intel comes from. Those communications, we take detailed notes on all of them, and it's how we can kind of track the threat actor groups, how big their teams are based on, how many different folks we're coordinating or communicating with. So yeah, it's a really great source of intel for our team on top of being able to obviously help out our clients.
Sure, that's a great point. Well, and it looks like you might cover it on this slide, but so we had some questions come in around the process of reporting an incident, like who should the customer contact?
Yep.
And then also a question around where the costs come in. Does insurance pay for all of it, or customers paying for part of the retainer and then maybe everything that the insurance doesn't cover? I think those are some active questions right now.
Yeah, I can certainly cover a couple of those. So when it comes to, what's covered by insurance, it really depends on your policy. And I would encourage folks to push their insurance brokers to really dig into what their policy language is. 5 years ago, cyber insurance policies had great limits and covered just about anything under the sun. More recently, losses really relating from ransomware attack uptick have forced insurance carriers to either reduce limits, change the types of coverages. So it is really important. I'm not an insurance specialist, but it is important to be discussing and really pushing, your insurance broker, asking the tough questions to really make sure you understand what is covered, to make sure that you do have good coverage. The most important part is making sure, a ransom payment in the event of either encryption or exfiltration, make sure that's covered. But then also all of the incident response fees plus legal fees. So what I would say when it comes to reporting, we're here to provide the facts, get you back up and running, and really get the client back to a pre-incident state. I kind of say we're like the serve pro in the cyber world. So that's really our job. There's usually an attorney involved in most of the cases that we're working through insurance. And the attorney will determine kind of reporting requirements. So they'll have influence over what we document, how much we document, whether or not we produce a formal report. If you're a regulated industry, what your reporting requirements are. So we really, again, our job is to provide the facts so that you and your other kind of consultants and attorneys can make educated decisions about what you need to do with that information. So we really work hand in hand with internal and external counsel and the insurance claims handler. This is just a really high level incident response timeline. So if you have a major incident and you decide to engage us, whether or not you have a retainer or you just don't have a retainer and you want to go ahead and engage Arctic Wolf Incident Response, the first thing is to reach out. You can do that through Eagle. You can do it directly through the website. And then from there, what we're going to do is get on to what we call just a scoping call. And again, the value of just the scale of our operation is even during that scoping call, we're going to likely be able to give you a whole bunch of information about your situation. So based on what systems you're using. For example, a POS system that's commonly used by restaurants. There might be a known vulnerability that our team is responding to active incidents for. We might ask you, hey, do you have XYZ POS system? Yes. Most likely that was how they came in. So even during that scoping call, that initial call, we're going to probably be able to provide some information about kind of how it happened, and guide you on some kind of early steps, even if you don't engage us. So we always encourage folks, give us a call, let us understand, ask some questions. And then from there, what we're going to do is determine, one, do you need us? So we might listen to the situation and say, this sounds like, one email with a forwarding rule. You can probably work with with Eagle to kind of clean things up. Or no, based on what you've told us, this is serious, we should dig. Coming out of that scoping call, we're going to create a statement of work. It'll identify the work that we will need to do, and some estimates of hours. From there, if you have insurance, don't have an insurance, you'll approve the statement of work. Then our response effort starts. And that's where all that stuff on the previous slide is going to happen in parallel. We're going to have our forensics team starting the investigation. We're going to set up 24/7 monitoring of your systems. Recovery and restoration team will be working to get your business critical systems back up and running. And all of that work will be, threat actor negotiation team will be communicating with threat actors, and that core response effort starts. Once we get system back to kind of, stable state, then we start to what we call building a resilience phase. That's like, hey, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And this is where we can work with your partner to identify, here's how they got in, here's some controls that could have been in place that could have prevented this. Our whole goal coming out of incident response is to make sure that this doesn't happen to you again as a client.
Hey, Scott, one question that we had come in. Should they call their cyber insurer or should they call you guys first? And I imagine that answer might even change based on whether or not you've done some of that guardrail due diligence, but we had a question on that.
If they were about to get into the retainer, if you have a retainer, absolutely engage us first. I would say either way, we would prefer to get engaged first. Insurance, and actually most insurance carriers are going to say the same thing. Insurance carriers, their job at the end of the day, if you have a policy with them, is to be there to deliver on their promise, which is to cover your costs. So although they'll have a claims handler who will be the one who ultimately approves bills and things like that, they're by no means experts in this. So they're typically, the first thing they're going to do is loop in an IR firm. They will do it quickly. They're typically not 24/7. So depending on when, hour of the day, there could be some delays. So I would always say, in terms of like getting somebody on the phone who can provide some information that is valuable right out of the gate, the incident response firm, and I'm not just saying this because we are one, we would suggest call us first. We're going to at least be able to give you some guidance about some things you can do right now to maybe mitigate, further damage. So first call will be there. And then if you have cyber insurance, again, we'll loop them in and we'll get the process started there. But first things first, a call to the incident response company is always a good first step.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we talked a lot about, all right, boom happened, you have a major incident, kind of what is our process? And regardless of whether or not you have a retainer, all of those components in our response effort are true. However, if you have a retainer in place, and we call it our incident response jumpstart retainer, we call it a jumpstart retainer because it really does streamline the initial response effort, which can really do two things for you. One, it allows us to get started faster, and I'll kind of walk through why that is the case. But it can literally shave 2 or 3 days off of the front end of one of these incidents, which is extremely, extremely valuable. The other thing it can do is really reduce the anxiety associated with one of these events. When you've done some planning, and when we say jumpstart retainer, it's very basic stuff. But when you've done those basic things, everybody just kind of knows what each other is doing, and these go much more smoothly. So it really is a valuable exercise and product. It's not very expensive, and it can just mean that if you're unlucky enough to have a major cyber incident impact your organization, the response effort is faster and just a little more, they're always hectic, but it'll be less hectic. So incident response retainers are not a new concept. And when we looked at how we wanted to go about launching our retainer, we really spent a lot of time looking at what worked with existing retainers and what wasn't working with retainers, and what wasn't working with traditional IR retainers is really what we're looking at here. The first thing is that most retainers include some bucket of incident response hours. And the reality is for most organizations, they're not going to have a major incident in any given calendar year. So the challenge that these paid retainers with buckets of hours included cause is you have hours that could potentially go unused. Which leads to kind of that second challenge, which is, okay, I'm getting towards the end of the year. I have, 100 incident response retainer hours I haven't needed for an IR case. Now I'm trying to burn those hours down on other services, which may or may not be valuable to me. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but you're kind of forced in this position of, I need to use these hours some other way. And then the final piece is a lack of planning assistance. Again, the more we can be familiar with your internal team, your external team of vendors, the more smoothly these incidents go. And IR planning is something that's been around a long time. What we've done with our IR Jumpstart retainer is worked really closely with our incident response team to make sure we are collecting only the stuff that our team needs to get started. So we're not doing a whole lot of playbooking and a whole lot of templating, but we're making sure we know who your critical people are, internal, external, what your business critical systems are, where your backups are, what types of backups you have. We just want to know as much as we can about your team and your internal IT infrastructure as possible, so that in the immediate aftermath of an incident, we're not wasting the first 2 days just trying to collect information and everybody's scrambling to try and get that done. So, planning is really, really important. So I kind of tipped my hat here a little bit, but so what our Arctic Wolf Incident Response Jumpstart Retainer is, it's a mouthful. It keeps all the good components of a traditional retainer, but it also adds in some of the areas that we thought that traditional retainers were falling down. So the first one is IR planning resources, and I'll talk about it in a second here. But we have an online web portal that allows you to log in and create your Jumpstart IR plan within that web portal. So you don't have to worry about a Word document floating around in somebody's drawer that has all this information in it. It's online. We can access it. You can update it anytime you want. And that is what our team uses. You have an incident, we can pull that information up, and that truly is the jump start. We're able to get started right away. So IR planning through a modern web app, really, really important. The next thing is response time. One of the most important parts of a retainer is knowing you have a team to call and they are going to respond quickly. And we have the fastest in the industry 1 hour response time. I don't know of anybody else who offers that. 24/7, you reach out, you will have one of our IR team members on a phone call within 1 hour of reaching out. So it's extremely fast. And again, that initial call will be somebody who can start to provide value right then and there. Speaking of the first call, that scoping call is complimentary. We never charge for it. So again, that's where we're going to get a lay of the land. If you're already a Jumpstart retainer, we know what your business critical systems are. We'll be able to say, hey, we know that you use Fortinet XYZ. There's a known vulnerability for it. We've seen 5 cases in the last week. It's possible that that's how these threat actors, got started. So scoping call happens, and that's free. We don't have any upfront purchase of hours required as part of our retainer. So we've gotten rid of that. How do we use these unused hours piece of it? And it comes with a preferred price of $2.95 an hour, which is a really excellent kind of hourly rate. And then finally, a cyber insurance approved IR team. So you're not going to have to be negotiating with your cyber insurance carrier to make sure we can do the work. We're already approved by every major insurance carrier here in the US. So I'll just wrap. I really do want to point out and really kind of drive home the importance of the IR planning. So what you're looking at here is just a couple screens from that online IR planning tool. It's a key part of our Jumpstart Retainer program. So it's kind of hard to see here, but the first thing we identify and that we put in the system is your internal team. And again, it's hard to describe just how chaotic the immediate aftermath of one of these incidents can be for an organization. It is the classic people running around, with their hair on fire situation. So even basic stuff like having all the contact information of the key individuals can be hard to come by. Keep in mind, your email might not be working. Systems are just down. So the typical stuff you're used to like logging into to get this information out of oftentimes isn't accessible. So, getting your internal key stakeholders identified, their emails and their phone numbers in here, really important. Same with your external providers. So the external tab has same information, but for your outsourced IT, it might be your insurance broker's information, your insurance information, who's your cyber insurance policy with, who's your primary contact phone number. Really valuable to have that in here. Then we get into more kind of network information. Again, keep in mind, we might not have access to your network. It might be taken offline because it's been infected. So knowing your IP addresses, physical locations, your business critical systems, what types of backups do we have for each one of those critical systems? All of that information is collected in this Jumpstart IR plan. It can be updated whenever you want. It's accessible by our team, by Eagle, by obviously your internal team as well. So can't highlight it enough, can't draw attention to it enough. A really important part is kind of this IR planning piece. And I think the IR plan builder is a really unique aspect of this retainer.